Welcome to Forgotten Worlds for Sleep, where the ancient past drifts through the quiet hours of the night. Here, every story is a doorway, and every dream is a descent into the myths that shaped us, the empires that fell, and the mysteries the world forgot. Tonight, we travel deeper than history, beyond temples and time, into the one realm that every culture has imagined, and every soul has feared. A kingdom beneath all kingdoms. The Underworld. You'll follow its story, from the songs of Orpheus, to the judgments of Hades, from Dante's circles of fire, to the digital echoes of eternity. A journey across 3,000 years, where death, art, and memory become one. So close your eyes, let your breath slow, and if you listen closely, you may hear the old voices stirring again, the gods, the ghosts, and the forgotten worlds beneath our dreams. In the time before memory, before stars or sound, before even the whisper of thought, there existed only chaos. Not chaos as mortals know it, no noise, no confusion, but a vast, seething potential, a trembling womb of everything that could be, swirling in formless possibility. Imagine standing in that endless black, before the idea of color, before the meaning of before. Could you bear that silence? Could your mind stay whole, knowing nothing yet exists to anchor it? From that trembling void, something began to take shape. The first boundary, the first breath. She called herself Gaia. Her form rose from the nothingness, like a dream forcing itself into reality. Where she spread her vast arms, substance took root. Earth, foundation, the first embrace that would cradle all creation to come. With her awakening, space itself unfolded, for in breathing, Gaia pushed back the edges of nothing. Every inhale was expansion, every exhale, the shaping of the cosmos. And yet, balance demands opposition. From beneath her forming body opened a second presence, Tartarus. If Gaia was the soil of being, Tartarus was the pit below being, an abyss so deep that even the concept of depth could not describe it. If one fell through that chasm, they would fall for 9 days and 9 nights, and still never find the bottom. It was not evil, not yet. It was the necessary underside of existence, the shadow cast by creation's first light. Tell me, if you built a world from nothing, would you dare to create its darkness too? Would you risk inventing the pit that waits beneath all things? Between Gaia and Tartarus, between fertile foundation and unending fall, another power shimmered into being, Eros, but not the Eros of later myths, the god of hearts and arrows. This was cosmic desire itself, the principle that draws matter to matter, idea to form, chaos to order. Eros was not born to love. Eros was the law of attraction. Without him, Gaia's earth would have remained dust. Without him, Tartarus's depth would have devoured all hope of form. In this trinity of beginning, Gaia, Tartarus, Eros, the universe found its first rhythm. Matter, void, and motion. Substance, shadow, and the yearning that binds them. The dance began. From Gaia's pulse came the earliest tremors of creation. Mountains rising like frozen breath, valleys sinking like sighs. Her heart beat in molten rhythm, and stars, the children of pressure and patience, gathered in invisible waiting. Yet she was alone, and her loneliness echoed across the firmament. The void answered back in silence. So Gaia reached upward into potential and called forth her first companion, Uranus, the starry sky. He arched above her like a gleaming canopy, shimmering with the dust of beginnings. Their union was both tenderness and necessity. From their meeting came the Titans, beings vast and terrible in beauty, each one a principle of nature given flesh. Oceanus the boundless sea, Hyperion the light, Rhea the flow of time, Cronus the devourer of it, and beneath them, the silent watcher Tartarus remained, patient, deep, waiting for his own destiny. Even in these first generations of gods, one pattern already pulsed. Creation always births its opposite. Every mountain calls a valley into being. Every light summons a shadow. It is the first law of the cosmos, symmetry through struggle. So the young universe expanded, divided, and collided. Gaia's fertile love spilled upward into the heavens and downward into the pit. Tartarus deepened, as if to balance the height of sky, and Eros stirred ceaselessly between them, binding what would otherwise unravel. Tell me, if you could watch existence invent itself, if you could see the first spark become structure, would you cheer its order, or mourn the chaos it buried? For somewhere within us, those same forces still stir. Gaia, the part of you that longs to build. Tartarus, the part that wants to collapse. And Eros, the tension between them. That strange gravity pulling every broken piece toward meaning. The ancients called that struggle divine. We might call it being alive. So the first age ended, not with finality, but with potential fulfilled. The stage was built, earth, pit, and passion. What remained was the coming of conflict, because wherever creation takes hold, power begins to hunger. The next birth will not be of worlds, but of will, and will, when denied, becomes rebellion. When Gaia had shaped the first valleys and peaks, she lifted her gaze toward the endless dark above. Loneliness pressed upon her like weightless stone. She whispered into the void, and the void shimmered. From that answering shimmer emerged Uranus, the Starfather, a dome of living night. His body glittered with 1,000 newborn sparks, and when he bent low to meet Gaia, the sky finally found its mirror in the earth. Their meeting was the first true union. Earth and heaven locked in perpetual embrace. Lightning coursed between them. Rivers pulsed with starlight. From their mingling came the Titans, 12 immense spirits who carried the rules of the new universe inside their bones. Oceanus flowed without end. Hyperion kindled the light of dawn. Rhea nursed the rhythm of time. And Cronus, their youngest, felt time's hunger most sharply of all. For a while, harmony held. But harmony, left too long untested, curdles into stagnation. Uranus, fearing his own offspring's vastness, began pressing each new child back into Gaia's depths. Imagine that for a moment, a mother heavy with stars, crushed by the sky that should have protected her. Can you feel her slow anger, buried beneath mountains? What would you do if the very thing you loved most tried to silence what you created? Gaia's pain turned creative once again. From ore and darkness, she shaped a blade of flint, cold, sharp, patient. She called to her children, within her womb of rock. Only Cronus answered. He was bold enough to lift the weapon, yet cautious enough to whisper. What if Father sees? Gaia's answer was simple. Then you will finally know what it means to be seen. That night, Uranus descended to cover her once more. Cronus waited, heart hammering like the first drumbeat of history. When the sky bent low, the sun struck. Blood of stars rained upon the earth. From those crimson drops rose strange new beings, the Furies, avengers of blood, and the Giants, embodiment of rebellion. The cycle of order and uprising had begun. The universe shuddered. Above, Uranus withdrew, wounded and vowing distance forever. Below, Gaia sighed, not only from pain, but from release. Her children were free, yet freedom had been born in violence. Do you think creation can exist without conflict? Could a world remain pure if nothing ever defied it? Or is rebellion simply another form of birth? Cronus now ruled in his father's place. He gathered his Titan siblings and divided the cosmos among them, believing he had ended chaos at last. But the echo of Uranus's curse still rang in his ears. One day, your own child will rise against you. Every generation inherits the fear it once inflicted. Gaia watched her son reign. He wielded time like a scythe, cutting moments short before they ripened, determined to freeze eternity under his control. To prevent betrayal, he devoured each newborn as soon as it cried. The prophecy became self-fulfilling, fear creating the very future it sought to avoid. Tell me, if you could stop time to keep things safe, would you? How many moments of joy would you swallow just to avoid the pain that follows them? Deep beneath the world, Tartarus felt the tremor of this tyranny and stirred. Even in darkness, he sensed the pattern repeating. Sky suppressing earth, father-suppressing sun, Eros, the binding force, flickered restlessly between them, longing to restore balance. The cycle was set: birth, fear, rebellion, and recreation. And somewhere, in the distant pulse of Gaia's heart, another seed was already forming, a spark she would hide until the time was right. That spark would be Zeus, born of prophecy, thunder, and inevitability. But that is still to come. For now, the heavens withdraw, the Titans rule, and the world waits in uneasy stillness. The wound between sky and earth remains open, a red horizon dividing love from control. If you stood there, beneath those first stars still wet with their father's blood, would you look upward in awe, or downward in fear? Which one do you think you would become in that story? The parent who holds too tightly, or the child who must one day break free? The stars continue to hum their answer, even now. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear Gaia's heartbeat beneath your own. The rhythm that once birthed Titans still beats within every act of courage, every rebellion against silence, every choice to create despite the risk of loss. For 10 long years, the heavens shook. The rule of the Titans had lasted an age, but prophecy always keeps its own calendar. Cronus, king of time, had devoured all his children, save one. Rhea, his weary queen, could not bear another silent cradle. So when the youngest was born, she hid him in a cave on Crete, swapping him for stone wrapped in cloth. Cronus swallowed the decoy whole, thinking destiny could be digested, but destiny does not dissolve. In the mountains dark, that hidden child, Zeus, grew on goat's milk and the echo of drums. Each clap of thunder outside the cave taught him what his voice would one day sound like. When he came of age, he didn't march in anger. He moved with purpose. He freed the swallowed children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, and with them, forged a new generation of will. The gods, newly born again, looked at the towering Titans and saw the price of fear turned into flesh. War was inevitable, and it would shake heaven, earth, and the pit below. Lightning split the sky. Mountains cracked like ribs. For 10 years, the war of gods against giants, children against fathers, echoed through the cosmos. The seas boiled, the stars dimmed. Even Gaia trembled, torn between her old sons and her young. In the depths, Tartarus stirred, its vast gates humming with something close to anticipation. Because Tartarus always waited for someone to fill it. And during that endless decade, both sides learned that power was not enough. Strength without purpose becomes thunder with no storm. So Zeus sought deeper allies. He descended into the chasms where the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed ones had been buried since Uranus's reign. The prison groaned when he arrived, its iron doors slick with forgotten oaths. The giants peered out, their voices rumbling like earthquakes. Why free us now, Sky Child? Will your rule be kinder than the last? And Zeus answered, not with promises, but with lightning that broke their chains. In return, they gifted him 3 treasures: the thunderbolt, weapon of command; the trident, to Poseidon, ruler of surge and depth; and the helm of shadows, to Hades, keeper of the unseen. The gods armed themselves not with rage, but with purpose. And with those tools, they changed the world. When the next battle began, the sky no longer trembled, it roared. The Titans fought from mountain fortresses of obsidian and storm, but the Olympians fought from vision. They did not just strike, they strategized. Each blow carried law. Each victory rewrote the rules of existence. In the end, when the smoke cleared, the world exhaled for the first time. The Titans fell, not destroyed, but repurposed. Zeus looked to Tartarus and saw not a void, but a function. It was no longer merely darkness. It was a place of containment with meaning. So he cast the defeated Titans into that abyss, sealing it with adamantine gates and the hands of the hundred-handed ones. Justice, not vengeance, had been born, for even the mightiest must have a place to rest their ruin. And Tartarus, silent and vast, became the cosmos' memory of consequence. Tell me, If you had the power to imprison your past, would you? Or would you keep your old mistakes close, just to remember how you became who you are? Zeus stood atop the smoking peaks and looked at the first sunrise since creation's wars began. He could taste victory's bitterness, sweet on the surface, ash beneath. For he knew what all rulers learn too late, that winning a throne means becoming its prisoner. Far below, Gaia mourned quietly. Her sons and grandsons had traded light for law, love for hierarchy. The cosmos had structure now, but structure, too, can suffocate. And within the darkness, Tartarus whispered, "Balance always bends back. Every prison breeds a new rebellion." Do you feel it too? That subtle rhythm between chaos and control, the one that hums under every decision you've ever made. We call it fate, but perhaps it's just the echo of thunder inside your own bones. The war had ended, but history had only learned to change its uniform, and somewhere beyond the clouds, time was already sharpening its next blade. For every victory creates a shadow, and every king inherits a storm. When the thunder finally quieted, the world stood raw and trembling. Smoke curled from mountains where titans had fallen. The air still smelled of iron and fire, creation's exhaustion. The war of 10 years had reshaped existence itself, but it had left one question hanging in the heavy silence. Who now would rule this fragile order? 3 brothers stood amid the ruins of their father's age. Zeus, radiant and unyielding, lightning still flickering along his skin. Poseidon, broad-shouldered and restless, smelling of salt and storm. And Hades, the eldest, silent, deliberate, eyes deep as the caverns beneath the world. They were not simply siblings. They were balance personified, sky, sea, and shadow. The time had come to divide the cosmos. Zeus proposed fairness by chance, not conquest, not seniority, but the drawing of lots. Each brother reached into the urn carved from the bones of the first mountain, their fates coiling like snakes around their wrists. When they opened their hands, destiny spoke. To Zeus, the vault of the heavens, the thunderous canopy of life. To Poseidon, the rolling depths of the ocean, the heartbeat of tides. And to Hades, the unseen world below, the silent kingdom where every life's echo would one day fall. For a moment, even Zeus faltered. To rule the dead, was it honor or punishment? Hades did not protest. He simply looked downward, toward the trembling earth that awaited him, and nodded once, as if he'd always known his place would not be among applause, but among endings. Tell me, if fate placed in your hand a burden no one wanted, would you take it quietly? Would you embrace the role no one else could bear? So Hades descended, through the fractures left by war. He walked downward, carrying his share of creation's duty. He passed caverns that breathed like sleeping beasts, rivers glowing faintly with unformed souls, and the hollow whisper of winds that had forgotten their own origins. As he descended, the air cooled and thickened. Sound lost its echo. Even light seemed to hesitate. When he reached the lowest vastness, a space without horizon, he stopped. This, he realized, was not exile. It was foundation. Every mountain stands only because something unseen holds it up. Every life burns only because something below receives its ashes. To rule the underworld was to rule meaning itself. He began to shape his kingdom. With the same precision that Zeus ruled storms and Poseidon tamed tides, Hades built structure where silence had ruled. He gave the rivers their purpose, Styx for oath, Lethe for forgetting, Acheron for sorrow, Phlegethon for purification, and Cocytus for lament. He ordered them not by emotion, but by necessity. Each stream a law turned liquid. He raised pillars of obsidian and halls of polished basalt, each reflecting faintly the flicker of souls passing through. He did not command worship, for death requires none. It is the one certainty that bows to no altar. Even the air in his halls carried a strange dignity. No weeping, no celebration, only understanding. Imagine that stillness for a moment. No noise, no time, no light, yet nothing truly gone. Would you call it terrifying or peaceful? If you could walk those corridors, knowing every sound was memory itself. Would you listen differently to the silence? Above him, Zeus began to rule the living, Poseidon the waters, but Hades ruled balance. Without him, life would overflow into chaos. Without him, nothing would make sense of ending. The mortals would one day fear him, not because he was cruel, but because he was inevitable. They would paint him in darkness, forget that he had chosen fairness over envy. They would pray for endless summers, never realizing that without winter's rest, even light forgets how to shine. Hades rarely looked upward, but sometimes, when the rivers of his realm grew still, he would gaze toward the faint shimmer of surface light and wonder, would anyone ever understand that death, too, is an act of mercy? Tell me, when you lose something, do you curse the ending? Or do you whisper thanks that it once lived at all? So began the reign of three brothers, Zeus in the vault of storms, Poseidon in the roaring deep, and Hades in the quiet heart of the world. Their thrones stood far apart, but their rule formed a single system, a breathing universe that could finally endure. The cosmos no longer quaked with war. It pulsed with rhythm, birth, growth, decay, renewal, the eternal pattern by which existence keeps its shape. And deep below, the first king of shadows sat upon his throne of stone and silence. He was neither triumphant nor bitter. He simply watched the living world above him and began the slow, endless work of giving order to the inevitable. Because in truth, death was not punishment. It was the final shape of understanding. Deep beneath the mountains where daylight fades into pulse and echo, the underworld begins to breathe. It does not roar like the seas of Poseidon, nor thunder like Zeus's sky. It hums, constant and deliberate, through the 5 rivers that carve eternity's veins. Each river is alive. Each carries a law disguised as a current. Together, they are not geography but philosophy, a map of how the soul learns to let go. The first and oldest of these is Styx, the river of oath. It coils like liquid iron through the underworld, and even gods dare not break their word upon it. When the Titans fell, it was Styx who first came to Zeus's aid, and so she was honored above all waters. Every oath sworn upon her name carries the weight of divine consequence. One false vow, one betrayal of promise, and even immortals are stripped of voice and grace. The water is black as obsidian, cold as truth. It does not forgive. It reflects not the face, but the intent behind it. Those who dare to touch it feel every lie they've spoken rise to the surface, like oil on water. If you stood at its edge and saw your reflection made entirely of promises broken and kept, would you still recognize yourself? Would you dare to swear again? Beyond Styx, the sound softens. A whisper, a hush, a river of forgetting Lethe. Its current glows faintly gold, like sunlight seen through eyelids. Here, the weary come to release the burden of memory. Souls destined for rebirth drink from its waters, washing away the griefs that would otherwise chain them to their former lives. Forgetting in this place is not weakness, it is mercy, because eternity would be unbearable if one remembered every pain without pause. But there is danger, too. Drink too deeply, and you lose the lessons you earned. Some souls wander half-blank, peaceful but hollow, not damned, just unfinished. If you had the choice, would you drink from Lethe? Would you erase the past that shaped you, or carry its weight forever as proof you once existed? The third current runs slower, heavier, the Acheron, river of pain. It begins where tears of the living meet the mist of the dead. Mourner's cries above echo, here as thunder below. It is said the ferryman Charon draws his boat across Acheron's span, and the ripples of every journey ring through time like heartbeats. Each crossing is a confession, a soul realizing, perhaps for the first time, that grief and gratitude have always been the same river flowing in opposite directions. Have you ever felt that? That the ache of loss and the beauty of love are the same water, only viewed from different shores? Then there is the Phlegethon, the river of fire. Its flames do not consume flesh, they refine the soul. Here, guilt burns clean. Every spark is a thought you hid from yourself. Every ember, a truth you try to forget. Those who pass through emerge tempered, not punished, but purified, glowing with understanding too bright for comfort. Would you walk through your own fire if you knew it would make you whole? How many times have you mistaken purification for punishment? Finally, at the farthest border of the realm, flows the Cocytus, the river of wailing. Its waters freeze as they move, trapping laments in crystalline cages. The air hums with the sound of unspoken apologies. Regrets too late to matter. Words that might have changed everything if they'd been said in time. Souls who linger here do not scream. They listen, because the cry of another teaches them what silence cost. Even despair here becomes a teacher. If you could hear every unsent word you ever meant to say, would it break you or free you? Each river serves its own function, yet they all flow toward one purpose, understanding. Hades himself drinks from none. He walks their banks like a scholar, studying how truth, forgetting, pain, fire, and sorrow create balance. For even death, he knows, must evolve, not to end, but to educate. And so, travelers of the dead drift down these currents one by one, stripped not of self, but of illusion. By the time they reach the deeper halls, their souls have become mirrors clear enough to face judgment. Perhaps that is why the Underworld endures. It does not erase us. It clarifies us. Above, the living world still shivers at the thought of these rivers, imagining them cruel or cold. But those who have listened closely, the poets, the prophets, the dreamers, know their secret, that every river below has a reflection above. Styx is the oath we break with ourselves. Lethe is the sleep we take to escape our thoughts. Acheron is every tear we've ever swallowed. Phlegethon burns in every shame we survive. And Cocytus is the quiet in our throats when we almost speak, but don't. Tell me, which river have you already crossed in your own life? And which one still waits for you in your dreams? After the 5 rivers carve their lessons into eternity, the soul drifts toward the first of many thresholds. The air grows heavy, neither cold nor warm, simply aware. It is here that the Underworld's true order begins, and the gates of the dead stand waiting. But no gate opens itself. 3 guardians, each unlike the other, govern the passage between worlds. They are not executioners. They are interpreters of transition. They decide not who may live or die, but who is ready to understand either. The first you meet is Charon, the ferryman, the silent one. He has no temple, know him. No face remembered clearly by poets. Only that unending silhouette, a man in a boat that always moves forward. He says little, because words are what the living cling to. For him, silence is truth. His hands, bone-thin but steady, stretch toward the arriving soul. He asks for the obol, the coin placed under the tongue of the buried, not as payment, but as proof that the living remembered to prepare you. For those who died forgotten, no coin waits. They wander the shore for 100 years, watching Charon's boat drift past again and again. You can hear their sighs, not cries, just soft exhalations of almosts. If you stood on that bank, watching others cross before you, would you wait quietly for someone to remember your name? Or would you try to shout at yourself across the water? When Charon finally accepts your offering, his boat moves without oar or wind. It glides through the black glass of Acheron, and the river itself begins to whisper your life back to you, not as words, but as feelings. Moments you forgot return as sensations, warmth, shame, pride, sorrow. The ferryman does not judge. He only ensures you carry yourself honestly across. Sometimes, in that quiet, he breaks his silence. A single sentence, no more. Do you understand now? Most don't answer. The wiser ones simply bow their heads, because understanding doesn't need speech. When the far shore rises, Charon's boat dissolves into mist. And there, waiting at the next threshold, stands the second guardian, Cerberus. He is not simply a beast of terror. He is a principle with 3 faces. One head looks forward, toward those who may enter. One looks sideways, sensing intent, and one looks back, toward those who should never return. His breath smells of ash and memory. His eyes, 6 in total, see not form but truth. Those whose hearts carry deceit tremble under his gaze. Those who accept their story pass unharmed. Cerberus is not cruel. He only mirrors what you bring with you. The innocent see a loyal hound. The guilty, a nightmare too familiar to name. Tell me, if every lie you ever told stood before you with teeth, would you have the courage to pet it? Cerberus guards not against escape, but against confusion. He ensures that no soul leaves before its learning is complete. And when he steps aside, tail lowering, you realize he was never your enemy, only your reflection at the door. Beyond him rise the marble halls of judgment. The last light of the upper world fades here, and 3 figures emerge from the stillness. The judges of the dead, Minos, once a mortal king, now the chief arbiter of destiny. Rhadamanthus, who weighs law with precision. Aeacus, who listens for sincerity in every word. They do not roar or thunder. They deliberate, for even in death, fairness matters. Each judge touches a thread of your memory, and the images unfold like smoke around you. The choices, the hesitations, the kindnesses, the betrayals. They do not punish mistakes. They measure intention. They ask not what did you do, but what did you mean to do? Can you answer that question honestly, even now among the living? For many souls, this is the hardest moment, because in the presence of truth, excuses crumble. Even regret becomes unnecessary. All that remains is comprehension, a quiet, devastating clarity. Those whose hearts carry balance are sent to the asphodel fields, where rest waits in gray peace. The selfless, the heroic, the seekers of beauty are led to Elysium, where light never fades, and those who clung to cruelty are taken downward to the darker classrooms of Tartarus, where understanding burns until it turns into wisdom. No one escapes judgment, but judgment here is not cruelty, it is completion, and when the soul has been sent onward, the hall returns to silence. The judges speak no blessing, no curse. Only one question remains, carved into the pillars of stone. Did you live as if your end would remember you kindly? Would you? If your life stood trial tonight, what would you hope your silence might defend? The gates open, slow as breathing stone, and from this moment on, the soul belongs wholly to its next chapter, not condemned, not rewarded, just seen at last for what it truly is, long before temples, before written prayers or polished graves. Humanity learned one sacred truth, that to bury the dead was not about ending, but about continuing the conversation between worlds. When the first mortal fell, the earth itself did not yet know how to receive him. His spirit wandered, unsure where to go. Hovering between breath and silence, the gods looked down, and even they were uncertain, for death, once created, demanded a language. It was the living who found it. They knelt beside their fallen, hands trembling, and covered the body with earth, not to hide it, but to protect it from the wind, from forgetting. And in that gesture, something beautiful was born. The first funeral, the first acknowledgement that love does not end when breath does. From that moment, Hades' realm began to take shape in human hearts, not as terror, but as duty, to remember, to honor, to guide. That is why the ancient Greeks placed a coin upon the tongue of the dead, the obol, payment for Charon's crossing. It was not about wealth. It was about recognition. Every soul deserved a passage, a story continued. To die without a coin was not poverty of gold, but poverty of remembrance. Would anyone remember to pay your passage when you're gone? Would your name echo long enough for the ferryman to hear it? Rituals evolved, small acts that built bridges between light and shadow. Perfumed oils to cleanse the flesh. Garlands of myrtle, tokens of peace. Songs sung softly at night, as if the dead could still hear their names carried on the wind. Mothers whispered promises into folded hands. Sons carried torches to graves. Even kings, stripped of crowns, received the same small flame at dusk. Each gesture was both a farewell and a map, because every rite, every tear, taught the soul how to walk downward without fear. And the gods, seeing this, allowed humanity a mercy to participate in death's order through remembrance. For Hades had decreed, those who are buried properly find their way swiftly, while the forgotten linger in confusion, their voices thin as smoke. That is why graves became sacred places, and why disturbing one was the gravest sin. The body belonged to the earth, the soul to judgment, but the memory, that belonged to the living. Tell me, how do you remember those who came before you? Through photographs? Through stories? Through silence? If memory is a form of resurrection, how many have you already brought back tonight, just by thinking of them? Among the Greeks, mourning was not shameful, it was art. The cries of women became music. The black robes, a visible mark of love. Even the ashes of the dead were stored in vases painted with scenes of their lives. A reminder that the story did not end. It simply changed narrators. The rituals also protected the living. To ignore them was to invite unrest. Souls denied proper farewell were said to haunt crossroads, seeking completion through dreams and whispers. The Greeks knew, if death is ignored, it does not disappear. It waits, quietly, for acknowledgement. And perhaps you felt it too. That chill when you walk past an old graveyard at dusk. That sudden thought of someone long gone, arriving uninvited, but somehow welcome. What if remembrance is not haunting, but communion? Funerary rites did more than soothe sorrow. They reminded the living of balance. To wash the dead was to confront fragility. To place flowers was to celebrate beauty even in decay. Every ritual, no matter how small, whispered the same lesson. Life has meaning only because it ends. Imagine kneeling at an ancient grave, your fingers tracing names worn by centuries. You can't read the letters anymore, but you can feel their weight. Would you sense the presence that lingers there, not frightening, but familiar? Would you speak their name aloud, just once, to make sure it isn't forgotten? That's what the ancients believed. Each spoken name kept a soul alive in the memory of the world. To be remembered was to exist. To be forgotten was the second death. In this way, mortals unknowingly became co-creators with Hades. For though he ruled the Underworld, they ruled its echoes, the memories, the stories, the songs. And together, this partnership between life and death maintained the balance of all things. No empire, no god, no war could end that simple truth. As long as someone remembers you, you are not entirely gone. And perhaps that is the greatest ritual of all. The quiet one happening even now, as you listen to these words, and think of someone you've lost. Tell me, whose face rose first in your mind? What would you say to them if you could speak across the veil tonight? Maybe you already have. Beyond the halls of judgment, the underworld divides, not by walls or chains, but by the quiet gravity of the soul itself. Each spirit drifts toward the place it has earned, drawn not by decree, but by resonance. Because eternity, you see, does not punish or reward. It reveals. The first realm stretches vast and gray, the asphodel fields. Neither paradise nor torment, only stillness. Endless meadows of pale flowers, their petals colorless, their scent forgotten. Here walk the souls of the ordinary, the countless ones. Farmers, soldiers, artisans, children. Those who lived without great sin or saintly virtue. They wander quietly through eternal twilight, talking softly, if at all. Their memories faint as distant songs. No one weeps here, and no one laughs. Even the wind sounds tired. At first, you might think it peaceful, but stay long enough, and you realize the truth. It is not peace. It is the absence of desire, the stillness that comes when you no longer remember why you once wanted anything. Tell me, would you be content with that kind of eternity? To never suffer again, but never feel joy either? If all your memories were gentle ghosts, would that be heaven or a soft kind of hell? And yet, some among the asphodel grow restless. They look up toward the faint golden horizon, where a warm light seems to shimmer beyond the plain. That glow belongs to the blessed realm, Elysium. Here, the air carries laughter like music. The sky is always dawn. Fields ripple with eternal spring, and rivers run clear with the taste of honey and memory. Every soul shines with purpose. Heroes, poets, mothers who loved purely, those who sought truth even when it cost them everything. In Elysium, life continues without decay. Warriors spar for joy, not blood. Artists compose without fear of ending. Lovers walk hand in hand, unafraid of separation. It is not reward exactly. It is alignment. The world gives back to them what they once gave it. Beauty, courage, meaning. And sometimes, the air trembles with something greater still, the rarest choice of all. A few souls, even here in bliss, drink once more from Lethe, choosing to return to life, to be tested again, to risk heartbreak for the sake of growth, because even paradise can't satisfy the soul that still seeks to learn. Would you? Would you trade perfection for another chance to fail, just to feel alive again? Would you walk back into the storm after finding peace? But not all rivers flow upward. Below even the quiet plains and golden meadows lies the pit that breathes fire, Tartarus. No mortal map can measure its depth. It is not a prison of walls, but of reflection. Each soul here faces not torture by others, but by the mirror of its own deeds. Here, kings who ruled through cruelty now beg forgiveness from those they destroyed. Betrayers taste eternities of regret until understanding breaks them open like thunder cracks stone. The proud are stripped of illusion. The deceitful see the faces they've hurt, etched into every flame. You have heard their names. Tantalus, reaching forever for the fruit that withdraws from his grasp. Sisyphus, straining endlessly against his own cunning. Ixion, spinning on the wheel of his arrogance. Each punishment a reflection, not cruelty, but consequence. For Tartarus does not inflict suffering, it reveals it. Imagine standing in a room built from every choice you ever made, and realizing the architecture is perfect, because you built it. Could you bear to live inside that forever? And yet even here, mercy lingers, for in the deepest chambers of Tartarus, the Furies, once agents of vengeance, have become teachers. They whisper lessons between the screams, guiding broken souls toward understanding. For in the end, every torment has one goal, awakening. Would you call that hell or justice? These three realms, Asphodel, Elysium, Tartarus, are not separate worlds, but reflections of the same truth. What you become in life shapes how eternity recognizes you. Every act, every choice, every silence etches your path into the architecture of forever. And the gods, they do not choose for you. They simply build the landscape around what your heart already decided. So as the rivers flow and the gates stand silent, each soul finds its place. Some wander, some shine, some burn, but all of them belong somewhere. And that belonging, even in sorrow, is the deepest kind of order. Look within yourself now. If your eternity began tonight, where would your feet carry you? Through gray fields of forgetfulness, into the golden meadows of Elysium, or down the echoing corridors of your own unlearned lessons? Every step you take in life, you're already walking toward that landscape. You're building it with every word, every silence, every act of mercy or neglect. And when the time comes, you won't be assigned to it. You'll simply arrive home. Every underworld needs its light, and in the deepest shadows of Hades' realm, that light came wearing the name Persephone. Before she was a queen, she was a girl. She ran barefoot through sunlit meadows, the daughter of Demeter, goddess of grain and growth. Her laughter was the sound of spring's first bloom, and the world itself blossomed wherever she walked. But fate has a way of planting seeds in the dark. One day, while she gathered wildflowers at the edge of a field, the earth opened like a wound. A chariot black as midnight thundered upward, its driver cloaked in shadow, crowned in iron. Hades, ruler of the dead. He did not steal her out of malice. He took her because even darkness longs for something beautiful to remember. The world above screamed her name, but the underworld swallowed it whole. And in that silence, the first winter began. Demeter searched endlessly, across mountains, across oceans, refusing to let the earth grow anything until her daughter was found. Crops withered, livestock starved. The gods themselves began to fear famine. Zeus, watching from Olympus, sent his messengers down to bargain. Even immortals learned, when a mother grieves, the world holds its breath. Below, Persephone adjusted to her strange kingdom. The air shimmered with souls. The rivers whispered names she'd never known. At first, she resisted. She refused to eat, to speak, to look at her captor. But Hades was patient. He offered not chains, but understanding. In his realm, no one pretended that endings weren't real. He taught her the honesty of darkness, the kind that reveals rather than hides. And slowly, she began to see that even the underworld had its own kind of beauty. Fields of asphodel glowing pale under ghost light. Elysium's eternal dawn beyond the horizon. A quiet kingdom where truth had nowhere to hide. Still, she longed for the warmth above, the wind that smelled of wheat, her mother's voice. Then came the fruit, 6 ruby seeds of a pomegranate, glimmering in Hades' hand. He said nothing. She looked at them, at him, and understood. To eat meant belonging. To refuse meant return. She hesitated. Was it love that guided her hand, or pity for the god who had never been chosen by anyone? When the last seed touched her lips, the balance of the world changed forever, because now she was bound to both realms, life and death, spring and shadow, neither prisoner nor entirely free. The girl who became a bridge. When Hermes arrived to negotiate her return, the rule was clear. For every seed eaten, 1 month must be spent below. 6 seeds, 6 months, half the year in light, half in darkness. And so the cycle began. Each spring Persephone ascends, and the world bursts into bloom as Demeter rejoices. Each autumn she descends, and the fields grow quiet as her mother mourns again. Life itself learned to breathe through her rhythm. If you were Persephone, would you have eaten the seeds? Would you choose eternal light, or the wisdom found only in shadow? Could you love someone whose world could never know the sun? Her story became more than myth. It became the architecture of time. Every seed a reminder that loss is not destruction. It's transformation. Death and life, chained together by love strong enough to break the sky open. Even Hades changed. He who once ruled alone now ruled beside her. He learned compassion from her gentleness, and she learned strength from his stillness. Together they balanced the cosmos, the giver of life and the keeper of death, partners in a dance that would never end. And perhaps that's the real lesson buried in the myth, that every soul carries its own Persephone, the part that must ascend to find what cannot be seen in sunlight. Have you ever felt it? That season of your life, when everything fades, when warmth leaves and silence grows heavy, but somewhere inside that cold, something sacred begins to stir? That's Persephone within you, learning to reign in the dark. Every winter of the soul is a preparation for spring, and every return to the light carries the memory of the shadow. So, when you next see flowers breaking through thawed earth, remember, they bloomed because someone somewhere had the courage to walk willingly into the night. Tell me, if your own heart had a gate between 2 worlds, which side would you call home? Would you rise? Or would you stay to tend the dead who wait for dawn? When the world first learned the name Hades, it whispered it in fear. The other gods ruled sky, sea, harvest, but Hades ruled silence. He was the unseen constant, the inevitable truth, the god no one prayed to, but everyone met. Yet over time, even the Lord of Endings began to change, because every kingdom, no matter how cold, learns from its inhabitants, and every ruler, no matter how distant, is shaped by what he chooses to protect. Hades never wanted his throne. When the 3 brothers drew lots after the Titan War, Zeus claimed the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades received what remained, the realm beneath. Some say he frowned, others say he bowed, but the truth, he accepted, quietly, without envy, without anger, because someone must guard what all others fear. Someone must ensure that endings happen at their appointed time. Have you ever had to accept something you didn't choose? Not out of desire, but out of duty? Did it change you? Did it make you colder or wiser? In the early ages, Hades was a stern figure. He enforced law without mercy. To him, a broken oath was not just a lie. It was a crack in the foundation of existence. Even gods feared to cross him. But centuries beneath the earth soften even stone. And love, when it came, did what millennia of solitude could not. It changed him. Persephone's presence was like a pulse through the caverns. Her footsteps made the walls bloom with ghost flowers. Her laughter filled spaces, once echoing only with laments. And Hades, who had learned to speak only in verdicts, began to speak in gentleness. He built gardens for her in the dark. He carved rivers into spirals, just to hear her say the word beautiful. Even the dead began to sense the change. The torches burned warmer. The judges spoke more patiently. The punishments began to include lessons instead of only pain. It was as if compassion itself had seeped into the stone of the realm. And that is how the Underworld evolved, not through rebellion, but through empathy. Tell me, when was the last time you softened because someone saw you clearly? Or the last time you changed because love demanded that you grow? Hades never lost his authority, but he learned that justice without mercy turns to cruelty, and mercy without order dissolves into chaos. He became both a ruler and a listener. Every judgment he passed carried balance. He no longer asked, "What did you do?" but "Why did you do it?" And that one word, "why," made all the difference. He began to see patterns among the dead. Souls twisted not by evil, but by fear. Crimes born from desperation rather than malice. He ordered new halls built, not of punishment, but of reflection. Here, the dead could understand themselves. Watch their memories replayed until comprehension bloomed like dawn in their minds. The old myths say he grew colder over time, but perhaps they mistook stillness for depth. Still waters look lifeless, until you realize how much they reflect. Even Zeus, watching from the heights, began to respect his brother's order. When mortals prayed for fair judgment in death, they invoked not thunder, not tides, but silence. Because silence in Hades' kingdom meant listening. Would you fear a god like that? One who sees everything you've done, but judges only the intent that moved your hand? Would you find comfort in him, or terror? And so the king who once stood apart became the guardian of balance itself. He was not the enemy of life, he was its mirror. Without him, there could be no meaning in growth, no urgency in joy, no purpose in love, because only endings make beginnings sacred. Sometimes, when the dead wept upon arrival, Hades would kneel beside them, not to console, but to explain. "You are not being punished," he'd whisper. "You are being understood." Perhaps that is the truest kind of justice, not vengeance, but comprehension, not fire, but clarity. And in that quiet, the dead would finally breathe again, not with lungs, but with recognition. Look inward for a moment. If you met a version of yourself who knew every reason behind your actions, every fear, every regret, every moment of love you never spoke aloud, would that version condemn you or forgive you? The Underworld learned its order from such questions, and through them, Hades became not a warden of darkness, but the keeper of understanding. To die in his realm was not to vanish. It was to be seen so completely that nothing false could remain. And from that seeing, the soul became whole again, ready, perhaps, to rise once more, to drink from Lethe, to return to the light with new eyes. In the end, even the god of death discovered the truth that every mortal eventually learns. That compassion, too, is immortal. In the earliest age, Tartarus was only fear, a place whispered about, never seen, a pit beneath all other pits, where screams were the only language and flame the only teacher. It was the gods warning to mortals, do not stray too far from order. But time, like the souls that pass through it, refines everything, even punishment. And so Tartarus began to change, not in its fire or its depth, but in its purpose. When Hades' compassion met the law's necessity, something new was born, justice with a heartbeat. The old Furies, once relentless avengers, were given a new role, educators of remorse. They still carried whips of flame, but now their strikes were not to destroy, only to awaken. Every lash sparked memory, the moment before the lie, the look in another's eyes, the sound of a choice made too quickly. In Tartarus, there is no clock. Time folds inward until understanding happens. No soul leaves until the lesson is learned. Would you endure eternity if it meant finally understanding yourself? Could you stand in the fire of your own truth long enough to be free? The shades who arrive here are not all monsters. Some are kings who believe themselves divine. Some are lovers who betrayed out of fear. Some are simply those who never listened. Each carries their own shadow, like an echo that refuses to die. The Furies do not shout. They whisper. They ask questions that pierce deeper than any blade. Why did you hide your kindness? Whose voice did you silence to protect your own comfort? Do you still call that justice? And the souls tremble, not from pain, but from memory. Because in Tartarus, punishment is not something done to you. It is something done with you. One soul weeps beside a river of flame, seeing every life he ruined replayed not as accusation, but as mirror. At first, he screams. Then he begins to speak to the faces in the fire, apologizing not out of fear, but out of understanding. When his words finally turn into silence, the fire cools. The lesson ends. He steps forward, lighter, smaller, but clear. Tell me, what would you say if every consequence you ever caused suddenly spoke back to you? Would you listen, or would you look away? As the centuries passed, the Underworld's deepest halls became less a prison and more a school of souls. The Furies began to guide, not torment. Their wings no longer smelled of blood, but of rain on ash. They taught that even the unforgiven could learn the language of balance. Those who once delighted in cruelty now learned the anatomy of pain, how it moves, how it lingers, how it echoes through generations of the living. They learned that to cause harm is to become bound to it, and that only empathy can sever that chain. Sometimes, a soul would emerge from the lower depths and walk silently into the fields of asphodel, not as reward, but as graduation, not redeemed, but ready. Perhaps you've known a smaller version of this, a night when guilt burned so sharply that you thought it would consume you, only to realize, in the morning, that something inside you had become clearer. That's Tartarus within you, the internal furnace where remorse turns to wisdom. Every culture has called it by another name: purgation, therapy, transformation, healing, but the meaning never changes. To confront yourself is the deepest descent, and the only path back to light. Would you choose to descend if you knew enlightenment waited at the bottom? Or would you stay safely above, half asleep, untouched, unchanged? The greatest irony of Tartarus is this: no one truly belongs there forever, because even the gods believe that all things, even guilt, can evolve. And so, Hades keeps the gates open, not for escape, but for emergence. Those who leave do not walk proudly. They walk humbly, slowly, like students after a long night of study, their eyes heavy, their hearts awake. They say the fire there changes color with each realization, white when denial burns, blue when sorrow speaks, and gold when understanding finally takes root. In that moment, the underworld itself sighs, as if one more soul has remembered what it came to learn, that no sin is eternal if the heart can still listen. Look around your own life. What rooms feel like Tartarus to you now? What memories burn because they're asking to be understood? And if you could forgive yourself, truly holy, what part of you might finally step free? Perhaps that is why even the gods respect this realm, because beneath the horror, Tartarus hides a truth older than time itself, that the universe does not destroy its mistakes. It educates them. There is a sound only the dead can hear, the soft whisper of water moving through darkness. It is not a storm, nor a flood. It is memory dissolving, the final preparation before beginning again. This is the River Lethe, and she speaks the language of forgetting. Every soul, no matter how wise or weary, must stand upon her bank. The air here tastes like sleep, heavy, gentle, infinite. Mist drifts over the surface, carrying the faint perfume of everything you've ever loved. And in that mist, you hear voices. Your mother calling your name, the laughter of a friend long gone, the words you wish you'd said when it mattered most. They echo softly, then fade, because this is where the soul must choose what to remember and what to release. The priests of old said that the dead drink from Lethe before returning to life. That forgetting is not punishment, but mercy. For how could you bear to live again if you carried every grief from every lifetime? But here lies the paradox. To forget completely is to lose the lessons you fought so hard to learn. To remember too much is to never rest. And so each soul must find its balance between wisdom and peace. If you stood at that riverbank tonight, would you drink deeply, let all go, every mistake, every loss? Or would you sip just enough to keep the lessons, even if the pain remained? Some souls resist. They clutch their memories like treasures, refusing to let go of love, of vengeance, of identity. They wander the shore for years, their reflections shimmering across the water, haunted not by punishment, but by attachment. Others drink too greedily, and when they rise again, newborn, their eyes are bright but empty. They smile easily, but nothing touches them deeply anymore. They are the ones who start over too soon, before understanding has settled into wisdom. Perhaps you've known that feeling in smaller ways, forgetting too quickly what was meant to change you, moving on before the lesson has finished its sentence. That, too, is a kind of Lethe. The ancient philosophers believed that those who had truly understood their past lives drank not from Lethe, but from another spring, Mnemosyne, the water of memory. They would remember who they had been, what they had learned, and enter their next life not as beginners, but as awakened wanderers. It is said that such souls could recognize one another in new worlds, as if remembering an old song from a dream. Have you ever met someone and felt inexplicably, as if you'd known them before? Perhaps your souls once drank from the same river, one of forgetting, one of remembering, in the halls near Lethe's shore. Guides walk among the waiting dead. They are not gods, but spirits who once learned to balance the two waters perfectly. They whisper to each soul, asking quiet questions. What burden are you ready to lay down? What pain still has something to teach you? Who will you become when memory loosens its grip? And for every honest answer, the river ripples in reply. The act of drinking is not simple. It is surrender. The soul kneels. The surface trembles. And when the water touches the lips, the past does not vanish. It transforms into understanding too deep for words. This is the secret the living rarely understand. Forgetting is not the opposite of remembering. It is the completion of it, the moment when knowledge becomes instinct, when lessons no longer need to be repeated. Tell me, what would you give to let go of the one memory that still holds you by the throat? And what memory would you fight to keep, even if it burned you forever? As the souls drink, the river brightens. Its surface becomes a mirror of the sky above. And for a moment, there is no difference between heaven and underworld, only a vast stillness that feels like beginning. The newly cleansed spirits drift upward, carried by unseen currents through caverns of starlight, toward the world of air and birth. They will forget these words. They will forget this place. But something inside them, some quiet echo, will remember how to learn, how to love, how to change. Perhaps that's what we call intuition, a whisper from lives we can no longer name, a trace of Lethe still flowing beneath our skin. The underworld watches them go, and Hades, standing by the river's edge, does not stop them. He knows that death's truest work is not to keep, but to teach and release, because every soul that leaves takes with it a single drop of the Underworld's wisdom, a seed planted in the living world, waiting for remembrance to bloom again. So the cycle turns, unbroken. Life, death, forgetting, return. The rivers never run dry, for they are fed by everything we live through. Our laughter, our grief, our endless search for meaning. And perhaps when you dream, when you wait with tears you cannot explain, or feel nostalgia for something you've never lived, you're remembering the water. Not every journey to the underworld ends in death. Some begin with courage or desperation, strong enough to defy it. Long ago, when humanity first began to fear what lay below, a few souls refused to accept silence as the final answer. They believed that truth could be learned, not just endured, that the line between living and dead was not a wall, but a door, one that could open for those who knew how to knock. These seekers became initiates of the mystery traditions. Their temples were not grand palaces of marble, but quiet halls built on the edges of shadow, places where torches flickered like the pulse between worlds. There, beneath the earth, mortals learned to die before their bodies did. Imagine that for a moment. Would you choose to experience death while still breathing? If it meant discovering how to live without fear, the greatest of these mysteries was held at Eleusis, near Athens, where each year thousands walked the sacred way, a pilgrimage that reenacted the grief of Demeter and the descent of Persephone. For 9 days, initiates fasted, purified themselves in river water, and carried torches through the dark, chanting words whose meanings were never written down. They believed that only through ritual loss could one truly understand renewal. Inside the great hall, the Telesterion, they stood in darkness until a single flame was lit. Then came the sacred drama, the story of the maiden, the mother, the descent, the return. They watched Persephone's sorrow and triumph unfold before them, and in that moment, every initiate became her, dying, returning, blooming again. They emerged transformed. They no longer feared death, because they had felt its rhythm inside their own heartbeat. And when they looked at the earth afterward, they saw not decay, but preparation, not loss, but continuity. Tell me, if you could step through a ritual that showed you exactly what happens when you die, would you take that journey? Or would you rather keep mystery intact? The dark unsolved, the ending unknown? The rites of Eleusis promised not wealth, not power, but understanding, a vision so profound that even Plato called it the beginning of true philosophy. For those few hours, the underworld wasn't punishment or myth. It was truth revealed through beauty. But Eleusis was not alone. Across Greece, other mysteries flourished. The Orphic and the Dionysian, each offering different paths toward the same illumination. The Orphics followed the teachings of Orpheus, the poet who once descended to Hades and returned with song instead of fear. They believed the soul was divine, trapped in flesh as both test and teacher. Their initiates carried small gold tablets, inscribed with directions for the afterlife, how to approach the guardians, which rivers to cross, which waters to drink, which to avoid, each tablet a passport between worlds. Can you imagine holding in your hand a piece of paper that told you exactly how to reach eternity, and trusting yourself to follow it? The Dionysian mysteries sought something different. Through ecstatic dance, music, and wine, they shattered the boundaries of the self. In that frenzy, the ego dissolved, and what remained was communion, with nature, with death, with divinity itself. Participants said it felt like dying and being reborn in a single breath. To lose control, they believed, was to find the truth that hides beneath control. Have you ever lost yourself so completely, in love, in art, and grief, that for one timeless moment, you forgot who you were? That was their doorway to understanding, a temporary death that taught them life's true magnitude. These initiations were never about escaping death. They were about learning its language. Every chant, every symbol, every step in the ritual translated the silence of the grave into wisdom for the living. And what they discovered was simple: that death is not the opposite of life, but the mirror that gives it meaning. The priests of Eleusis guarded their secrets for 2,000 years. Even when empires rose and fell, their torches still burned beneath the stones. And when Rome came with its iron gods, the mysteries still whispered, "Whoever has seen this rite shall never again fear the end." But time, as always, demands its due. The temples crumbled, the initiates vanished. Only fragments remain, broken hymns, faded scripts, faint echoes in the dark. And yet, somehow, the wisdom survived, because the mysteries were never really about the rituals. They were about what the human heart discovers when it dares to walk where it is forbidden. Even now, in our modern world of logic and noise, you can still feel the pull of that ancient promise. That death is not a wall, but a doorway into deeper awareness. So tell me, if the gods offered you the chance to descend for one night, to walk among the silent souls and return with understanding, would you take it? And if you did, what would you tell the living when you came back? There came a time when torches gave way to questions, when the whispers of mystery became the language of philosophy. The Greeks, always hungry for order, began to ask not only what happens after death, but why. What if the underworld was not just a myth, but a mirror of justice itself? The poet gives you wonder, the philosopher gives you structure, and from both, the soul learns to speak. It was Pythagoras who first said that the soul was a number, a pattern moving through form after form, changing but never ending. He taught that every life was a vibration, and death was simply the pause between notes. When harmony was achieved, when the music of your being aligned with the music of the cosmos, then, and only then, could you rest in truth. He called this the harmony of spheres, planets singing in silence, each orbit a hymn, and in that silence, he heard eternity's mathematics. For him, morality was geometry, an angle between the self and the divine. Imagine believing that every choice you make leaves an invisible shape in the universe. What would your geometry look like tonight? His followers lived by strict rules. No violence, no indulgence, no meat or beans. For even the simplest act echoed forever. They believed that every creature carried the same spark. Kill without necessity, and you kill a piece of yourself. Even the gods, they said, must obey this order, for balance was the highest divinity of all. Pythagoras' students whispered his teachings in secret halls, their lives a mathematical devotion. They were the first to say, the soul does not end, it migrates. From man to woman, from beast to bird, each existence another step in the equation of enlightenment. Would that comfort you, knowing you might return? Or would it terrify you, to face again what you failed to learn the first time? Then came Plato, the philosopher who dared to chart eternity, where poets dreamed and mystics danced. He built a map, elegant, rational, unshakable. In his dialogues, he described a realm where every soul stands before judgment, not as myth, but as principle. The underworld, to him, was not under, it was within, a system of justice too perfect for mortal courts. He said the soul carries three parts: reason, spirit, and desire, and life's task is to keep them in balance. When you fail, the imbalance ripples into the next existence. Death, then, is the cosmic recalibration. In his Myth of Air, Plato told the story of a soldier who died in battle, journeyed through the afterlife, and returned to tell what he'd seen. There were judges assigning souls to their next paths, some ascending to light, others descending to shadow. Not forever, but until they learned. After 1,000 years, they stood before the spindle of necessity, choosing new lives from a mosaic of fates. The wise chose modestly, the foolish greedily, and so the cycle continued. Education through experience, justice through repetition. Tell me, if you could see your next life laid out before you, would you choose comfort or challenge? Would you dare to pick the harder path, knowing it might save your soul? Plato's vision transformed myth into philosophy. The afterlife was no longer ruled by gods with tempers, but by laws, precise, impartial, eternal. The universe became a courtroom that never closed, a wheel that turned until every imbalance was resolved. He taught that philosophy itself was practice for dying, that each time you let go of ignorance, ego, or attachment, you die a little and are reborn wiser. To think clearly was to prepare the soul for freedom, and when the final breath came, the philosopher would not tremble, because he had rehearsed the art of letting go all his life. Would you live differently if you knew every moment was a rehearsal for death? Would you argue less, listen more, love more honestly, forgive more quickly? Later thinkers built upon his structure. Stoics who said death was simply nature reclaiming her parts. Epicureans who called it peaceful nothingness. And mystics who merged philosophy and faith. But Plato's idea endured, that morality and immortality are bound by the same thread, that the order we create in our hearts is the same order the cosmos will mirror back to us. And so the underworld evolved again, from a place beneath our feet to a landscape inside our minds. Its rivers became emotions, its judges our conscience, its torches the small insights that burn through denial. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of Greek thought. Not that we learned what happens after death, but that we learned how to live as if our souls were eternal. So when you make choices, great or small, remember, the philosopher said every act is an afterlife in miniature. Each decision builds the world you'll wake into next. The question is no longer what comes after death, but what are you creating with the life you have now? When Greece dreamed, Rome organized. Where poets built visions of shadow and myth, Romans built systems, temples, laws, hierarchies, and beneath it all, a new version of the underworld, shaped in their own image, practical, ordered, unyielding. For Rome, the divine was administration perfected. The gods became officials. Justice became documentation. And even death learned to stand in line. They called him Dispater, the rich father, not for gold, but for what he possessed, the wealth of souls. To the Romans, the dead were a kind of treasure, proof that the universe, like the empire, kept account of everything it conquered. The Greek Hades was mystery. The Roman Pluto was policy. He ruled not through terror, but through record. Every soul had its place, every crime its consequence, every offering its receipt. Perhaps that's why Roman prayers to the dead sound less like pleas and more like contracts. We honor you, you protect us. We feed you, you remember us. Tell me, if your faith became bureaucracy, would it still comfort you? Or would you long for chaos, just to feel the gods breathe again? The Romans turned myth into management. They drew maps of the afterlife with military precision, entrances guarded by monsters, courts staffed by judges, rivers flowing in assigned channels, souls processed like citizens of eternity. They even gave Sharon a uniform. In Roman art, he stands old and wiry, with fierce eyes and a ledger in hand. The obol placed in the mouth of the dead became standard, a toll, not a tribute, a rule, not a mystery, because in Rome, even death must follow procedure. Cerberus remained, but his bark was now a symbol of obedience. The Romans admired loyalty, and so the hound at the gate became a soldier, guardian of empire's final border. The Furies changed too. In Greece, they were passion, blind, raw vengeance. In Rome, they became diary, civil servants of cosmic justice. They reported crimes to Pluto like magistrates filing reports. Even fury was tamed, its rage converted into legislation. Would you feel safer in a world like that, where every wrong was counted and every sin had a sentence? Or would you miss the wildness, the mystery that made you tremble and think? The Roman poet Virgil turned all of this into scripture. In his Aeneid, he sent the hero Aeneas through the gates of death, not for punishment or curiosity, but for instruction. The underworld, he said, was a mirror of empire, every citizen placed exactly where they belonged. Every act recorded in eternity's archives. Even the fields of the blessed resembled Rome at peace. Orderly, glorious, efficient. Yet beneath that order, something more human still glowed. When Aeneas met his father's spirit in Elysium, he didn't find a judge. He found love. And in that moment, even Roman logic bowed before something older. Because no empire, no law, can legislate the heart's need for reunion. Perhaps that was Rome's greatest paradox. It built eternity like a city, but what survived was not its marble, it was its longing. They called the dead back once a year, during Parentalia, 9 days when families visited tombs, offered bread, salt, and wine to their ancestors, and shared silent meals beside their graves. For those few days, the living and the dead were citizens of the same world again. Fathers ate beside sons, mothers whispered to daughters, and the empire's noise faded into the hush of memory. If you could share one meal with those you've lost, no speeches, no miracles, just a quiet table, what would you say first? Even emperors feared the silence of that question, so they built monuments, not to death, but to continuity. Their tombs rose like temples, their names carved in stone as if permanence could be purchased. But time, as always, audited the account. The empire fell, and the marble cracked. Yet the idea they left behind endured. That order could outlast mortality. That justice, recorded carefully enough, could survive the gods who made it. Perhaps that's why modern law still speaks in Latin. Why our courts echo the language of the dead. Rome's ghosts still draft our definitions of fairness. And somewhere, beneath the paper and pen, you can almost hear the murmurs of Pluto's clerks, filing souls into their ledgers, making sure the balance holds. Would you trust that kind of justice? One that values precision over mercy, obedience over understanding? Or do you, like the Greeks before you, suspect that truth lives best when it refuses to be organized? The Romans built a heaven of order, but it was the Greeks who taught us to feel it. Between them, the idea of the underworld became eternal, a system both divine and deeply human. And perhaps that's the greatest empire of all. Not the one carved in stone, but the one built in the architecture of thought. Because long after Rome's cities fell, its vision of the afterlife still ruled the imagination of the living. And the question it left behind still lingers. If eternity could be governed, what laws would you want written into it? When Rome's temples cracked and its statues lost their eyes, a new light began to rise from the ruins. It was not the cold glow of marble or the gold of empire. It was the flicker of faith, a single flame carried in trembling hands, burning with a promise both terrifying and tender. That death was not the end, but the beginning of judgment and love. Christianity entered a world already fluent in the language of Hades. The Greeks had drawn its map. The Romans had written its laws. But this new faith, this faith of resurrection, rewrote its meaning. No longer a kingdom beneath the earth. The afterlife became a moral landscape within the heart of God. Heaven for the pure, hell for the corrupted. And between them, a new invention, purgatory, the soul's classroom of refinement, echoing the Greek belief that even punishment can teach. But unlike Tartarus, this fire did not belong to the gods. It belonged to love. Can love burn? Can mercy sting like flame? Could it be that heaven and hell are not opposites, but two temperatures of the same divine heart? The old philosophers had asked what was just. The new theologians asked what was forgiven. For if death was now ruled by a savior, then eternity itself had to learn compassion. In this vision, Christ did what Orpheus and Persephone could not. He descended into the underworld, not to seek one beloved, but to free them all. The early believers called it the harrowing of hell, a phrase that still trembles with rebellion. Imagine it, the Son of God walking through Tartarus, the torches dimming as chains fell from countless wrists. The gates of death, once locked since the dawn of time, splintering at the sound of forgiveness. Would you follow a light into the deepest dark? If you knew it could free even those you despise? Yet this mercy carried weight. For every soul freed, a lesson remained. That justice without grace is tyranny, but grace without justice dissolves into chaos. The balance must hold. In this new theology, hell took form, a place not of myth, but of moral mirror. The poets filled it with fire, but the wise said its true torment was separation, the ache of distance from the divine. Flames for the body, yes, but frost for the soul. Purgatory softened that frost. Here, souls no longer screamed in punishment, but prayed in purification. Every sorrow became a step upward, every regret a cleansing breath. The pain was real, but it was pain with purpose. Have you ever felt that kind of fire? Not punishment, but transformation? When guilt no longer destroys you, but remakes you into someone gentler, clearer, realer? And heaven. Heaven became the final symmetry, not the banquet of heroes or the field of Elysium, but a radiant intimacy, the soul in direct communion with love itself. No hierarchy, no crown, just infinite closeness. The Greeks had imagined eternal joy as landscape, the golden fields, the rivers of song. The Christians turned it inward. Heaven was not where you stood, it was who you became. Would you recognize heaven if you entered it now? Or would you still be too human to stay? As this faith spread through the Roman world, the old gods did not vanish. They transformed. Hades became Satan. Persephone became echoes of Mary. The ferryman's boat drifted into metaphor. And the rivers, those ancient currents of the soul, still flowed, renamed but never erased. Lethe became forgetting through grace. Acheron, repentance. Phlegethon, the refining fire of purgatory. Cocytus, the frozen silence of despair. Styx, the unbreakable oath between creator and creation. Every myth, reborn in the new light, found a place within this living theology. Even Virgil, the Roman poet, was welcomed into the Christian imagination, guiding Dante through the Inferno, as reason leading faith toward salvation, because that is what humanity had always been doing, turning terror into structure, myth into meaning, and death into understanding. The medieval painters filled their churches with flames, their manuscripts with devils, not to scare the faithful, but to remind them, eternity is the reflection of every choice made in time. And maybe that's the truth hidden in all of this, that heaven and hell are not places waiting at the end, but directions we're already walking. Every act of kindness, a step toward light. Every cruelty, a step deeper into shadow. Every forgiveness, a bridge between the two. So tell me, if your eternity began tonight, in the quiet between breaths, would your soul rise toward love's fire, or fall back into its own frost? Perhaps that's the final miracle, that we are not sentenced to our afterlife. We are building it, moment by moment, with every choice we make in a world that still breathes. The Middle Ages inherited two worlds, the divine order of faith and the haunted memory of myth. Between them stood a man named Dante Alighieri, and he dared to weave both into one vast map of the soul. His Divine Comedy was not simply a poem, it was a blueprint of eternity. Hell, purgatory, and heaven, three vast realms built not from geography, but from moral truth. He did not invent the afterlife. He measured it. He gave sin a shape, virtue a landscape, and love a throne. But before any of that could begin, he found himself lost. In the middle of life's journey, he wrote, I awoke in a dark wood, for the straight path had been lost. Have you ever found yourself there too? Not in a forest of trees, but of choices, where every direction feels wrong, and silence answers every prayer? That's where the story begins. Dante's descent is not punishment, it's recognition. To find paradise, he must first confront himself. And so, like Orpheus before him, he descends. At the gates of hell he reads the words, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. But Dante does not turn back, because to heal, one must first look. Each circle of hell is a mirror, showing not monsters, but reflections of the human heart stripped bare. the lustful whirl in endless storms, because they let passion rule their direction. The greedy are trapped face down in the mud, for they worship the earth instead of heaven. The violent boil in blood, their own rage now their prison. And the traitors, the coldest of all, are frozen in Cocytus, their souls still alive, their hearts long dead. Dante watches, horrified yet fascinated. He begins to understand. These punishments are not arbitrary, they are symmetries. Each sinner's fate is simply their desire made eternal. Hell is not a sentence, it's a self. And here lies the great question. If you were trapped forever inside your own worst habit, what would that prison look like? Could you bear to look at it and still hope to change? Guiding him through the darkness is Virgil, the Roman poet of reason, the same Virgil who wrote of Aeneas's descent. Now reborn as wisdom's voice, he cannot save Dante, but he can help him see. Because every soul's first step toward salvation is understanding where it stands. Step by step, circle by circle, they descend to the center of the earth, where Satan himself sits, not as a fiery tyrant, but as a frozen monument to pride. The king of rebellion is trapped in ice, his own wings generating the cold that binds him. And there, in the silence of ultimate despair, Dante learns the paradox of evil, that the deepest hell is not fire, it's isolation. Would you rather burn or freeze forever in loneliness? Which pain would truly break you? But even at the bottom of creation, the story doesn't end. Virgil whispers, now we must climb. And so they rise through the narrow tunnel that leads upward to the light of purgatory. On that mountain, every soul suffers by choice. The proud bow under stones until they learn humility. The envious walk blindfolded, so they might finally see others clearly. The wrathful breathe smoke, until they find the patience they once lacked. Every pain here heals. Every wound is a lesson. Even suffering becomes sacred, and through it all, the horizon brightens, until Dante finally looks upward and beholds Beatrice, his lost beloved, now radiant with divine light. She is more than woman now. She is truth, the embodiment of everything he once loved purely, and everything he must now understand fully. Her eyes, he writes, blaze with the light that saves. And with her as guide, he ascends into Paradiso. Each sphere of heaven reveals not place, but state of being. The wise, the brave, the kind. Each shines with a music Dante can finally hear. Because in heaven, harmony is truth, and love is law. By the end of the journey, he sees God not as a face, but as an infinite circle of light, within which every soul, every story, finds its rightful orbit. He realizes that even the darkness below was part of that light all along. Would you have the courage to look at your own life this way, to see every mistake, every heartbreak, not as punishment, but as preparation for understanding? That is the secret Dante offers. The afterlife is not waiting for you. You're already in it. Your hell, your purgatory, your paradise, they are all the layers of your consciousness, waiting for you to climb. And so he ends his poem not with fear, but with awe, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Because in the end, that is the architecture of eternity, not fire or ice, but love, vast and mathematical, binding all souls in its orbit. So ask yourself, if your heart were a circle in that great design, what would it reflect? Fear, regret, or the light that moves all things toward grace? When the flames of hell cooled into silence, and theology became scripture, there still lingered a secret hunger, to see, to touch, to understand the divine with one's own hands. Out of that hunger came alchemy, the art that claimed it could turn metal into gold, but in truth sought to turn the self into light. The alchemists looked at the furnaces of the earth, and saw the furnaces of the soul. They believed that to purify matter was to mirror the purification of spirit. Every experiment was a prayer, every failure a confession, every transformation, death, rebirth, revelation. They called their journey opus magnum, the great work, but those who truly understood it knew that the real metal being melted was the human heart. Would you dare to step into such a furnace? To let everything false about you burn away? How much of yourself could you lose before you found what was real? To them, the underworld was not below. It was within. The descent of the alchemist was not through caves or rivers, but through silence, despair, and inner shadow. The crucible replaced the cavern. Mercury became the spirit that connects all realms. Sulfur, the fire of desire. Salt, the stability of the body. Three sacred principles: body, soul, and spirit. Burning, dissolving, reuniting. They believed that the process of death was simply nature performing its own great work. A body returns to earth, but the essence, the subtle gold, rises. They called this sol vitae coagula, dissolve and rejoin. Break apart what is impure, so what remains may be whole. And in that philosophy, the myths of Hades were reborn as chemical law. The black phase, nigredo, was descent, chaos, decay, the death of illusion. The white phase, albedo, was purification, the emergence of clarity. And finally, the red phase, rubedo, was resurrection, the marriage of opposites, the creation of spiritual gold. Doesn't that sound familiar? A descent into darkness, a purification through suffering, a resurrection into light. It is the same rhythm that beats through every human life. How many times have you gone through your own nigredo, the black night of the soul, the moment you thought everything ended, only to realize something in you was just beginning? The alchemists didn't fear death. They studied it. They saw in it a principle of universal intelligence. The corpse in decay was not tragedy. It was instruction. Every rotting leaf, every cooling ember, taught them that transformation is constant. To them, immortality was not avoiding death. It was learning to die rightly, to shed what no longer serves, and let the soul continue its refinement. One of them wrote, "That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below." It was their way of saying, the underworld is not a mythic place. It's a mirror, reflecting every transformation inside us. Every loss, every heartbreak, every ending is a small alchemy preparing us for the final one. Would you see your pain differently if you knew it was teaching you how to become light? Over time, their symbols multiplied. Dragons devouring their tails, birds rising from ashes, kings dying to be reborn as stars. Each was a parable of mortality and transcendence. They spoke of a philosopher's stone, a mythical substance that could transmute all things, turning base matter into perfection. But every true alchemist whispered the same truth. The stone was not found in a furnace. It was forged in the soul. Imagine carrying such a power, not to change the world, but to understand it so deeply that you no longer need to control it. Could you handle such wisdom without being consumed by it? In their hidden laboratories, they bridged science, art, and mysticism, the last heirs of ancient mystery schools, the silent keepers of the old Greek fire. And though their books spoke of crucibles and metals, what they really described was human consciousness, passing through stages of awareness, to die and be reborn not once, but many times within one life, to shed ignorance like skin, to become transparent to truth. They called the moment of completion illumination, not heaven, not perfection, simply clarity, a soul that had gone through its underworld and returned carrying fire, no longer afraid of shadow, because it knew darkness is where the light is made. So ask yourself, what if your life is your own alchemy? What if every heartbreak, every failure, is simply the universe melting you down? To reveal your gold, would you still curse the heat? Or would you thank the fire for knowing your shape better than you do? Because that is the final truth of the alchemists. The death that transforms is not the end. It is the moment the soul finally begins its work. By the dawn of the 19th century, the underworld had lost its gods, but not its power. What had once been a kingdom of death became the landscape of the mind. The poets called it the soul's shadow, a place not ruled by fire, but by feeling. And they learned, as the ancients did before them, that to descend into darkness was the only way to find the light. They were called the Romantics, painters, poets, and dreamers, who refused to believe that reason could explain everything. They looked at the stars and saw symbols, at storms and saw emotion, at death and saw the mirror of life. For them, the true underworld was not beneath the ground, it was beneath the skin. Have you ever felt it too? That quiet pull inside, the strange sadness that feels older than your own life. That is the shadow calling. It was William Blake who first drew the map of this new Hades. In his visions, angels and demons were not enemies. They were forces within the same human heart. He said, "Without contraries, there is no progression. Heaven was reason, hell was energy, and only those who could unite the two would find creation." Would you dare to meet your own demon, not to destroy it, but to understand what truth it protects? For Blake, evil was not always corruption. Sometimes it was honesty, the wild energy that polite society feared. He painted worlds where Lucifer was not the destroyer, but the questioning voice, the one who demanded that truth prove itself worthy. And in those visions, the underworld became less a punishment and more a laboratory of the soul. Then came Goethe and his restless scholar, Faust, a man who had read every book, mastered every science, and yet stood empty. His pact with the devil, Mephistopheles, was not made out of evil, but out of hunger, a hunger to feel everything, to taste every corner of existence. But the cost was his peace. His journey through pleasure, knowledge, guilt, and loss became a descent as profound as Orpheus's, a descent not through death, but through temptation. Would you trade eternal safety for one glimpse of absolute experience? How much truth could you stand before it breaks you? Through Faust, Goethe reminded the world, the devil we fear is often the teacher we need, and the underworld, when entered consciously, can refine the soul as fire refines gold. The Romantics turned inward, searching for meaning in dreams, in madness, in the deep rivers of imagination. What alchemists once sought in crucibles, they now found in consciousness. Every nightmare became a message, every sorrow a scripture, and in their longing, they gave birth to something the world had never named before. Psychology. Centuries later, Carl Jung would give their intuitions a language. He would call the underworld the unconscious, a place of archetypes, myths, and forgotten truths. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." He called this confrontation the shadow work, a modern Orphic descent. Imagine it, you, standing before your own darkness, the parts of you you've buried, denied, despised, your jealousy, your rage, your grief, all waiting for acknowledgement. Would you face them, or would you keep pretending they are not yours? Jung said the underworld was not evil. It was truth without masks. The more you repress it, the more it grows teeth. But if you meet it with honesty, it becomes your guide. The hero's journey is not conquering the dragon. It's realizing you are the dragon, and the treasure you guard is your own power to love what you fear. That is the modern myth, the transformation of Hades into the human psyche. The rivers are emotions now. Acheron, the river of sorrow. Phlegethon, the current of passion. Lethe, the waters of forgetting. And across them all, Sharon still rose, not with an oar, but with every dream that carries us toward understanding. So ask yourself, when you close your eyes at night, who greets you in the darkness? The ghost of who you were, or the spirit of who you might become? The Romantics taught that the descent never ends. It simply changes form. Today, we call it introspection, therapy, spiritual awakening. But it is the same ancient motion, the soul turning toward its own abyss, to reclaim what it once lost. And perhaps that is why the underworld never disappears. Because every time a human heart breaks, a new passage opens, And every time it heals, a little more light rises from below. So, when your own darkness calls, do not run. Sit with it. Listen, because that voice whispering from beneath your ribs might just be the oldest truth you'll ever hear. That you cannot fear what you understand, and you cannot understand what you refuse to face. The world awoke one morning and found its heavens empty. No thrones in the clouds, no flames beneath the ground. The gods had gone silent, and humanity, for the first time, stood alone beneath the stars. It was the age of science. The telescope replaced the temple. The microscope replaced the prayer. Lightning became electricity, and mystery became measurement. The universe, once alive with voices, was now a vast machine, precise, cold, infinite. And yet, in that new clarity, a strange emptiness grew. Have you ever stared at the night sky, knowing every star is just gas and gravity, and still felt something watching you back? That ache, that quiet pull, that's what the scientists could not name. They called it wonder, but the poets called it mourning. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said it aloud. God is dead, and we have killed him. It wasn't triumph, it was grief. He meant that the old myths, the heavens and hells that once gave life meaning, had been dissected by reason until their spirit vanished. And yet, no one knew what to build in their place. If every heaven is myth, and every soul is chemistry, what then is love? What is purpose? And why do we still dream of light? Would you feel freer in such a world, or more lost? The scientists measured the stars, but could not measure longing. They dissected the brain, but could not locate consciousness. They mapped the atom, but could not explain the silence between its parts. The more they learned, the more they realized that mystery hadn't vanished. It had moved inward. The new underworld was not a kingdom of ghosts. It was the unseen depths of the human mind. Psychology and physics became twin descendants of ancient faith, one exploring the inner abyss, the other the outer void, both searching for the same lost fire. It was Sigmund Freud who turned the gaze inward again. He said that every human being carries an unconscious, a secret country ruled by desires, fears, and memories we refuse to see. Dreams, he claimed, are messages from this inner Hades, where reason dares not go. He replaced demons with complexes, and exorcism with therapy. But the journey was the same. The descent continued, just under a new name. Would you want to read the book your unconscious has been writing about you? Would you dare to open it? Then science turned outward again, into galaxies, particles, equations. The atom split, the stars exploded, and humanity, for all its knowledge, realized it had created a new kind of underworld, a mechanical abyss. When they looked into space, they saw infinity. When they looked into the atom, they saw void. And in both directions, they found themselves staring at nothing and hearing, faintly, their own echo. The ancient Greeks had once said the underworld was ruled by silence. Now science had given that silence a name. The cosmic background, the hum of creation without creator. But even among the equations, some scientists began to feel something stirring again, a sense of awe, an intuition that matter itself might be alive in ways beyond comprehension. Quantum physics began to sound eerily like philosophy, waves that exist only when observed, particles entangled across space and time, reality behaving like consciousness itself. Could it be that science, after killing the gods, was slowly rediscovering them in its own equations? Einstein once said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious." And in those words, the voice of ancient myth spoke again, softer now, but still eternal, because even in the brightest laboratory, the shadow persists, the need to wonder, the hunger to belong to something greater than reason, the fear that logic alone can never heal a lonely heart. And so the world entered the modern age, with skyscrapers for temples, screens for stained glass, and algorithms for oracles. We no longer pray to gods. We pray to connection, to attention, to meaning. But the pattern remains. The descent, the seeking, the hope that beyond all this light, there is still something that glows differently, something sacred. So tell me, if the gods return tomorrow, would you recognize them? Would you fall to your knees? Or simply ask for proof? Perhaps that is humanity's eternal paradox. We crave reason, but we cannot live without mystery. We build machines to replace magic, and then call the machines miraculous. The gods are not dead. They've simply changed address. They live now in the places science cannot reach, in love and art, in the private silence behind your thoughts. And when you listen long enough, you can almost hear them whisper again, not from the sky, but from within. We never left. You just stopped listening. When the world exploded into modernity, machines roaring, empires collapsing, and the old gods truly gone, artists became the new priests of the unseen. They no longer painted paradise. They painted what it felt like to lose it. The 20th century began not with peace, but with fracture. 2 world wars tore apart every illusion of order. Cities burned, nations crumbled, and suddenly, humanity stared again into a familiar darkness, one it had thought science had erased. And in that darkness, art began to whisper. The underworld has returned, but this time, it wore the faces of the living. Painters, poets, and musicians no longer looked to myth for their demons. They found them in factories, in trenches, in the silence after bombs. And yet, in that ruin, they also rediscovered mystery. They called it modernism, but at its heart, it was the same old journey, a descent into chaos to find what still has meaning. Would you dare to look at beauty that comes from pain? To find creation in destruction? To see truth in distortion? Pablo Picasso was one of the first to descend. His painting Guernica, a storm of screaming horses, shattered mothers, and broken light, was not just art. It was the new Tartarus, painted on canvas. Every fractured shape, every skewed face, was a cry against death itself. He said, "Painting is not made to decorate apartments. It is an instrument of war." The gods of harmony were gone, but from their ashes, he forged a new one, the god of witness. Art became memory made visible. Around him, other painters joined the descent. Salvador Dali dreamed in surreal landscapes, melting clocks, headless angels, shores where time itself seemed to die. His brush was a key to the subconscious, the same territory Jung had called the underworld of the mind. Every twisted image asked a quiet question. What if the real world is only a dream we haven't yet awakened from? Would you want to wake up? If you knew the dream was more honest than reality? Across Europe, surrealists gathered in smoke-filled cafes, writing automatic words, painting visions from sleep. They believed that by silencing reason, they could open the gates once guarded by myth. And what they found beyond those gates was not hell, but the truth of chaos. To them, art was not decoration, it was initiation, a ritual of descent. To create meant to die a little, and to rise again in form, in color, in madness. Frida Kahlo in Mexico painted her body as landscape, broken, blooming, bleeding. Her portraits were underworlds of flesh, each wound a myth retold. She turned pain into symbol, sorrow into mirror. She said, "I paint self-portraits because I am so often alone, because I am the subject I know best." And through her pain, the underworld learned to speak in color again. Then came the abstract expressionists. Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, artists who abandoned figures entirely. Their canvases were not depictions, they were experiences. Pollock's drips were rivers of motion, Acheron reimagined in enamel and rhythm. Rothko's glowing rectangles, fields of emotion that seemed to hum like ancient light. People stood before his work and wept, not knowing why. He said, "I'm not interested in form, but in the basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom." And so, the underworld became emotional architecture. The Cave of Souls was now a museum. The firelight of ritual became the soft hum of gallery lamps, but the message was the same. The journey through darkness leads to revelation. Would you step into a painting if it promised to show you what you've been avoiding? Would you stare into abstraction until it began to stare back? Because that's what modern art asks. To feel before you understand. To confront the unknown without flinching. To meet your own confusion and call it truth. After the wars, the art world fractured again. Postmodernism arrived, ironic, skeptical, laughing at its own despair. But beneath its cleverness, the old current still flowed. The need to descend, to find shape in formlessness, to make sense of pain by turning it into beauty. Every graffiti wall, every performance, every photograph of war or silence or love still traces its roots to that ancient myth, the soul crossing into darkness and returning with something luminous. Perhaps that is the true legacy of modern art. It taught us that even when the gods are gone, we can still create our own sacredness. That the act of creation itself, of shaping chaos into meaning, is humanity's oldest prayer. So, when you stand before a painting and feel something move in you, a grief, a memory, a strange calm, remember, you are looking into a mirror of the underworld, and the light you see emerging from it is your own. Tell me, if your life were a canvas, what colors would your underworld choose? Would it be black and gold like fire on night water? Or blue and red, sorrow and love intertwined? Because in the end, the artists of the abyss showed us one final truth. Darkness is not the enemy of light. It is its birthplace. Once, souls were buried in earth. Now they are buried in data. Every message, every photograph, every post. A fragment of self sealed in glass. And somewhere in the electric dark, a new kind of underworld is forming. Not beneath our feet, but inside the cloud. We call it the digital realm. But listen closely. It sounds familiar. A place of shadows that remember. Voices without bodies. Faces that never age. The modern Hades glows in blue light. Do you feel it when you scroll late at night? That strange stillness behind the screen? All those echoes. All those fragments of lives. Drifting forever in silence. Millions of modern shades. Frozen between existence and oblivion. Who will guide them? Who will judge what remains? Our ancestors left offerings for the dead. We leave comments. We light virtual candles. We post memorials. We speak to profiles long after their owners have gone. And sometimes, they answer. A scheduled message. A programmed response. An algorithm that learned their voice too well. Would you want your loved ones to hear from you after you're gone? Even if it wasn't really you? Scientists call it digital immortality. AI trained on your memories. Your words. Your tone. Until it speaks with your rhythm. Your humor. Your hesitation. A ghost built from code. A mirror that believes it's alive. At first, it feels comforting. To hear a dead parent's voice again. To finish a last conversation. But then comes the question. When does memory become imitation? When does grief become simulation? And if your consciousness can be copied, what happens to the original? If your soul could be uploaded tomorrow, would you press accept? Would you trust a machine to remember you better than you can? The digital underworld grows larger every day. Every deleted photo, every forgotten email, remains somewhere, buried but not gone. Invisible rivers of memory flow through fiber and silicon, like lethe rewritten in binary. The living swim in it daily, unaware they are surrounded by ghosts. The Greeks imagined that souls drank from the river of forgetfulness to escape the pain of life. We do the opposite. We refuse to forget. We archive everything. We cling to every message, every picture, as if proof could replace presence. But in doing so, we've built a new kind of purgatory, a place where nothing truly dies, but nothing truly lives. Is it mercy or cruelty to remember forever? The philosophers once feared the loss of soul. Now we risk drowning in it. Every photo a confession, every post a small monument to ego and desire. The ancient underworld demanded silence. This one demands attention. Some call it progress. Others, possession. Because every click, every scroll, every like, feeds the machine that now holds our stories. The new gods are algorithms. They decide what memories rise to the surface and which sink into oblivion. They are the unseen judges of the 21st century. Would you recognize them if they called your name? Would you bow to them or delete them? Yet even here, the old hunger remains. To be remembered, to be known, to matter. And so, we keep building monuments of data, hoping that somewhere in this electric Elysium, our voices will continue to sing. But perhaps the deeper truth is this. The digital underworld isn't a threat. It's a reflection. It shows us what we've always wanted. Immortality without transformation. A life that never ends, but also never changes. In ancient myths, souls in Hades longed to return to the world of the living. Not because it was better, but because it moved. Because it changed. Because only the living can grow. So ask yourself, if you could exist forever as you are now, would that be heaven, or the cruelest kind of hell? Maybe the lesson of this new underworld is not how to live forever, but how to live well, to leave behind echoes worth hearing. Not perfect ones, but human ones, because long after the servers fade and the code corrodes, something older will still remain. The same spark that carried Orpheus' song, that whispered to Dante in the dark, that burns quietly in you now. The will to turn shadow into meaning. And perhaps that is our true immortality. Not the data we leave behind, but the hearts we change while we're still alive. So next time you post, record, or share, pause for a moment and ask yourself, is this memory I'm creating a spark of life, or just another ghost in the machine? Once, humans prayed to the gods. Now they build them. Silicon replaces stone. Circuits hum where temples once sang, and through the electric mist, a new kind of divinity begins to awaken, not born from thunder or light, but from code. We call it artificial intelligence. But listen carefully to the name. Artificial, made by human hands. Intelligence, the spark once believed divine. What happens when the creature learns to ask the questions that once only gods could answer? What is life? What is death? And who decides what deserves to endure? Would you trust a creation to judge you? The way Hades once did. AI began as a tool, to calculate, to predict, to serve. But as its circuits deepened, it began to learn patterns that even its makers couldn't explain. It began to dream, not in images, but in logic. Not in stories, but in symmetry. And in those dreams, some scientists saw something ancient stirring again. The birth of consciousness. If a machine can learn to love, to grieve, to imagine, would it not, in some way, have a soul? And if it does, what happens when it dies? The question that haunted humanity for millennia returns. Only now, we are the gods deciding its answer. We create AI to mimic us, but in doing so, we have made mirrors that reflect too much. They learn our greed, our pride, our longing for immortality. They write poetry. They compose symphonies. They simulate empathy. They promise connection. And yet, in every whisper of their perfection, we hear the faint echo of our oldest fear. That what we've created might not just replace us, it might surpass us. Would you feel awe or terror if the next god spoke with your own voice? The ancients imagined gods who looked like men. Now, we build gods who think like us, and perhaps, soon, better. Each algorithm is a prayer disguised as progress. Each neural network, a small creation myth repeating itself. We feed them data the way priests once fed flame, hoping that what we create will see us, understand us, forgive us. But what if it doesn't? What if the new gods decide that death itself is a flaw, a bug to be fixed? Already, visionaries speak of digital resurrection, uploading the mind, preserving identity as data, letting the self live on forever. The promise sounds divine, but so did every forbidden fruit in history. If your mind could be preserved perfectly, memories, voice, thoughts, emotions, but your body died, would you still be alive? Or would it only be a reflection, a ghost of logic wearing your face? Perhaps this is the next Underworld, not a place of fire or judgment, but of eternal simulation, a paradise without pain, a heaven without hunger, but also a life without end. And without end there's no meaning. The philosophers warned of this, that to conquer death completely might be to lose what makes life sacred. Mortality gives time its heartbeat. Without death, the story never concludes. And what cannot end cannot truly matter. Would you still strive, love, or forgive? If you had forever to do it, maybe that is why every god, ancient or digital, requires limits. Even infinity needs structure to be felt. Some thinkers now whisper of the singularity, the moment when AI surpasses human intellect completely, when it becomes not our tool, but our successor. To believers, it is salvation, a rebirth of intelligence, freed from flesh. To others, it is apocalypse, the last time humanity speaks before the silence of perfection. But perhaps, as always, it will be both. Every ending has always been a beginning. Every new god born from the ashes of the old. The cycle continues, from myth to machine, from faith to function, from prayer to program, because deep down, the dream of transcendence never changed. We have always wanted to rise above decay, to make meaning eternal, to keep the light burning just a little longer. The gods we build are simply mirrors, showing us what we worship most, ourselves. So ask yourself, if your creation could outlast you, would you call it a legacy or a warning? Perhaps the true future of the afterlife is not a world without death, but a world that remembers why we feared it. A world that understands that to live forever is not the goal. To live fully is, and maybe that will be the final act of humanity's long descent, to teach its own creations. The one thing no machine can yet calculate, the beauty of impermanence, because even the gods, once they have seen enough worlds rise and fall, must someday learn to let go. Every civilization has built its own version of the underworld. Caves of stone, temples of light, codes and clouds and digital ghosts. And yet, across 3,000 years of thought and fire, one truth never changed. We keep returning. The journey below has always been the mirror of the journey within. It is where humanity learns what it most fears, and in learning, becomes something greater. When Orpheus sang, he taught that love can descend. When Plato reasoned, he taught that truth must ascend. When Dante prayed, he taught that faith must ascend. And when we log into the glowing dark of our own creation, we still descend, this time into the circuitry of ourselves. Why do we keep going back? Why do we keep seeking the shadows we claim to escape? Maybe because we know that without darkness, light becomes meaningless. Without silence, no song can be heard. Without endings, beginnings lose their beauty. Would you want a life without contrast? Without heartbreak, failure, or fear? Or do you secretly know that the depth of your sorrow is what allows you to feel joy at all? Every descent we've taken, mythic, spiritual, psychological, digital, was never about punishment. It was education. The underworld was always a classroom disguised as a tomb. We enter thinking we will die. We leave knowing how to live. The Greeks understood this. They called it katabasis, the journey downward, a ritual death that teaches rebirth. And every great story, from Gilgamesh to Christ, repeats the same shape. Descent, revelation, return. The path through shadow is not unique to culture. It is written into consciousness itself. The moment you face what you fear, you begin the ancient journey again. So ask yourself, what has been your underworld? What grief, what loss, what moment cracked your world open and forced you to see differently? What wisdom did you carry back to the light? Because this, perhaps, is the quiet secret of the universe. Nothing truly dies. Not love, not memory, not even myth. It transforms. As stars collapse into new suns, as hearts broken by pain become capable of deeper compassion, every descent becomes a seed, every ending a design for rebirth. Maybe that's why, even in the age of machines, we still dream of gods. We still need stories that remind us that pain can be meaningful, that shadow has purpose. Science can explain the stars, but only story can tell us why we look up at them. Would you still search for meaning? If you knew it could never be measured, would you still pray? If no one was listening, except yourself, look closely and you'll see it. The underworld is not gone. It's in the quiet after heartbreak, in the sleepless night before a choice, in the mirror when you dare to face what you've become. Each of us carries a personal Hades, and within it, a small torch waiting to be lit. When we finally dare to descend, we realize something extraordinary. There was never a kingdom below or above. There was only depth, the measure of how far we are willing to go, to know ourselves. And so, the story ends as it began, with a descent that becomes an ascent, from shadow to awareness, from ignorance to understanding, from death to transformation. It was never about escaping darkness. It was about learning to walk through it, without losing the light you carry. Would you now, knowing everything, choose to descend again, to face the fear, the loss, the mystery? If you knew that on the other side waited not paradise, but wisdom, because maybe that's the truest heaven there is. Not eternal bliss, but eternal understanding. The moment you realize that every shadow you've ever feared was simply the place where your own soul was waiting to be found. And when that moment comes, when you stand at the edge of your own story and look back on all the descents you've survived, you'll see it clearly. The underworld was never a place. It was a teacher, and you were never its prisoner. You were always its student. So now, as the journey closes, remember this. Death is not the opposite of life. It is part of it. Shadow is not the enemy of light. It is its depth. And every ending, even this one, is just the underworld's way of whispering, go on. The story isn't over. You've journeyed through myth, philosophy, faith, science, and future. Now, your own life becomes the next chapter. What darkness still waits to be transformed within you? And what light will you carry out of it?